Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. This week we go to Washington, oddly enough, to talk common sense economics. Anchoring our program will be Steve Forbes, former presidential candidate and chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media. Along the way, we'll chat with millennial policy analyst and former Warren Brooks journalism fellow, Ryan Young. Up first, I'm pleased to welcome back Bruce Yandle, Dean Emeritus of Clemson University's College of Business and Behavioral Science, and this year's winner of the Julian Simon Award. We caught up with Bruce in the halls of the J.W. Marriott in Washington prior to receiving his honors. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, Bill.
Bruce, congratulations on receiving this year's Julian Simon Award. There are two reasons why awards like this are given out. One, of course, is to honor the recipient, but the other is to keep the memory of Julian Simon alive. Remind us who he was.
And that's a memory that should be kept alive forever, Bill. He was an amazing man. The context is the decade of the 70s and early 80s. It was a strange time in a way, but maybe not so strange in the policy world. Free markets, and in fact freedom generally, didn't get a lot of respect at that time. It was a time when the intelligentsia argued that we were running out of everything. Everything from petroleum, that was at the top of the list.
Peak oil.
Yeah, it was peak oil. It was all over, folks. You've had the good days. It's always going to be worse. We were running out of copper. We were running out of tin. We were running out of arable land to feed our growing populations.
The neo-Malthusians were riding high.
They really were. And while we were running out of everything that seemed to matter to them, we had too much of one thing, and that was people.
Right.
So we had population growth that's got to be controlled. And then along comes Julian Simon, who would have no part of that. And he was inclined to say, well, let's just count. Let's just check the numbers.
And in fact, he actually wasn't sure when he started the research how it was going to come out.
No, he didn't. But let's just count the teeth in the camel instead of arguing about how many teeth might be there. And the more he counted, the more he realized, hey, we're not running out of things. We've got more and more. The prices are falling generally. So what's the alarm all about? And then he said, in addition to that, people, that's the solution to our problem, provided they are able to operate in free markets so that their creativity can address these growing problems. And so the other people hated him.
Yeah, he was a heretic.
He indeed was a heretic. He was the proverbial voice crying in the wilderness.
And he prevailed in the end. He won his famous bet with Paul Ehrlich.
He did indeed. But while winning, the losers never admitted they had lost.
No. And he left his legacy, which was The Ultimate Resource, the book that pretty much everyone's got to read.
Exactly.
Well, congratulations on being honored.
Well, it's a high honor.
As he left The Ultimate Resource, you leave the Baptists and Bootleggers story. We had you on our show last year, and we reviewed that theory of economics. I recommend that conversation to our listeners. You can find that podcast on our website. I'd like to cover some new ground with you today, starting with the macroeconomic big picture. Are we in the midst of a global currency war?
We could be. And that would be one way to describe it. We could be in the midst of a global trade war. Given what presidential candidates are saying, it's always easy to point to the other fellow and say they are the reason that we're having the problems that we have. And so it's what I call crazy season, and I'm not the only one who does that. It's crazy season in Washington. When people are running for national office, they say crazy things to catch our attention. But sometimes we're afraid, well, maybe they really mean it. But Europe is attempting to get its economy up on its feet by manipulating currency. The dollar, as a result, has gotten strong. Our exports are down. We have a manufacturing recession as a result of that primarily. And so it's real easy for someone to look at it as though, hey, I'm the Wizard of Oz. Just give me a chance to pull a lever. We will change the value of our currency so that we get even with the other guys. So we do have, I would say, partly because of presidential politics, but partly because of the realities of a lack of recovery from the Great Recession.
Speaking of that, your latest quarterly economic commentary notes that investment in capital goods has gone into hibernation. What are the long-term consequences of that?
Lower productivity. Our productivity rate is abysmal at the present time. There's a world surplus of capacity to produce things. As a result of that, there's little reason for firms to be adding capital in order to produce more, but there are a lot of reasons to be adding capital to produce smarter. That's not happening, so productivity is low. That generally means that incomes will be lower than they would be otherwise. So it's not good news. And there's little reason for investors to be encouraged right now.
Well, you're cheering us right up. I mean, the U.S. and Western Europe seem to have entered a protracted period of no growth or, at best, slow economic growth. Many pundits are telling us that this is the new normal and we should just get used to it. Are they right?
Well, it's been going on for 10 years for the U.S. economy.
Longer for Japan.
Longer for Japan. But we have a long-term average rate of GDP growth, annual rate of 3.14. That's called the norm. We haven't touched that norm in a decade. We've been below it. We're below it now, and we're falling. We're headed south. And so, while many people say this is the new norm, get used to it, most ordinary Americans are not willing to accept that dictum. And in a sense, I would say most good Americans really don't care what GDP is doing. Mm-hmm. They care what's happening in their zip code, at their address. Do I have to keep 3 jobs in order to put meals on the table and pay for a college education, or can I do it with 2? And so what we have right now, I hope, is something that people will not accept as the new norm.
If it does become the new norm and slow growth becomes a way of life, how is the government ever going to cover all its entitlement obligations?
It won't. What we have set up potentially is a train wreck that will happen if we do not get the trains running at different speeds on different tracks. We have a debt that is manageable right now because interest rates are almost zero.
Right.
So it's cheap as all get out for the government to borrow. In addition to that, our government can print money, and they've printed a lot of it. But at some point, as they always say, the chickens come home to roost. You got to pay your bills or you really have to print a lot of money. And that brings on inflation. And so the long-term picture is not a pretty one, which says we have to change our ways.
Given the enormous levels of sovereign debt, the concerns about inflation, the uncertain prospects of repayment, at least in non-inflated terms, why have interest rates on government bonds remained so low?
Mainly because of deliberate federal policy, Federal Reserve policy endorsed by the sitting presidents, President Bush and now President Obama. Those actions that have been taken have generated almost zero rates. So in a sense, people on fixed income, savers are the ones who have paid for what we have now that's redistributing income to smart money managers, people who know a lot about sophisticated finance, and away from, generally speaking, rural America, where people just get out and normally go to work every day and try to make a living. And the interest rate movements that might be coming, and I would expect they will be coming in either June this month or in September, will raise rates in America. That will tend to make the dollar even a little bit stronger, which then makes the manufacturing recession last a little bit longer. Well, it reminds us there's no such thing as free money.
What do you make of the collapse of the labor participation rate across the U.S. and in other countries despite the so-called recovery?
We are always, that is, when you are attempting to hire people, you are always competing with another employer. Sometimes the other employer is a package of welfare benefits. And that package of welfare benefits is not taxable. And the way our welfare benefits are constructed, generally speaking, the person who has been thrown on welfare or has chosen to go there for whatever reason, Great Recession being a major reason, pays a high price to go to work.
Well, the effective marginal rate of that first working dollar is pretty ugly, isn't it?
That's right. A working mom may be giving up free kindergarten, child care. They may be giving up subsidized housing, so on and so forth. And so there's what could be called a welfare trap that feels pretty good.
Hasn't that always been a European disease?
No. It may have started there, but we've got a pretty rich one, and that's a large piece. We had a huge increase in the number of people who were on disability income during the Great Recession. Out of the goodness of their hearts, we would say high motivation made it easier for people to go on disability. That fund is going bankrupt probably in the next 5 to 10 years unless it's replenished. And so, that means that you can make a pretty good bit of your former pay at a zero tax rate. And then if you can figure out a way to have a job where no one's looking, you can keep going.
The black market or the under-the-table economy.
And it's huge.
In the end, isn't that what's going to save countries like Italy?
And ours, too. When we talk about our GDP growth, obviously we're not able to measure the underground economy.
Right.
And it is huge. We measure it by looking at the circulation of $100 bills. Because that economy is fed with $100 bills.
Interesting.
Both the what we might call the legal and illegal.
Sure.
The guy who cuts grass or cuts down a tree and he says, here's my price if you pay me with cash. Here's my price if you write a check. Or the drug seller.
Sure.
The $100 bills are there. There's been an explosion in the number of $100 bills per capita starting with the Great Recession, and it continues to accelerate.
In many ways, it's a safety valve.
It is, and it's another economy that is out there.
Let's look at the other side of that coin. I mean, despite the fact that Congress is barely able to function, more and more of our economy is coming under the control of central planners, mostly from our regulatory agencies. Whether it's energy, transportation, healthcare, banking, or education, they seem to believe they can solve any problem by issuing a decree. How's that working out in all these heavily regulated industries?
Wow. It's a nightmare. And the most recent example of it is the Dodd-Frank legislation that is regulating all of America's financial institutions in ways they have never been regulated before, and in spades in terms of how they have been regulated before. There's something like 22,000 pages of new rules generated by Dodd-Frank. There's a huge increase in the number of people who are employed by banks keeping up with the rules. Even a small bank with 4 or 5 branches will have to have a dozen people who do nothing but keep up with compliance. And so then it will be impossible to be rule-abiding. There are so many rules. You will always be missing the mark somewhere. Then that causes the lenders to be even more cautious than lenders by their nature tend to be.
Isn't this sort of being frozen by rules thing what bogged the Soviet Union down?
It is. It is. And so we have a sort of a new class of people who are specialists in keeping up with all of this stuff, instead of being specialists in trying to figure out ways to do things differently, to dream, and to say, I've got an idea, let's try it out tomorrow. And someone says, are you out of your mind?
America has always been the best at that. But new business formation in the U.S. has dropped to dangerously low levels. Are Americans giving up on entrepreneurship?
They are following incentives that come to them. We behave reasonably and logically given the incentives in our individual worlds. And so where there's an opportunity for a reward, and we don't have to ask 15 people for permission or get 4 permits, then we can try out new things. And we can try them out at a very small scale. And if it doesn't work out, we don't lose a lot. The more permissions you have to get, the more rules you have to satisfy, the larger the scale the experiment tends to be, and then the bigger the risk. And so, yes, when we look at the growth of small firms, it is diminishing rapidly. When we look at the disappearance rate of big firms, they are not disappearing anywhere like the rate they have in the past. They are cushioned by regulation.
So they're not becoming fertilizer for our new companies.
That's right. That's right. And so you could say, in a way, we have a case of sort of hardening of the economic arteries.
So, Bruce, at the risk of awakening the economics professor in you, remind us, what's the knowledge problem, and what was F.A. Hayek talking about when he warned us of the fatal conceit?
F.A. Hayek was so brilliant, and it is at the same time elegantly simple. Ordinary people could read his journal articles and understand them because the message was so simple. He saw the economic system in a totally different way from other economists of his time and even many today. He said basically the economic system is an information system. We get signals that we call prices. Those prices tell us which things are becoming scarcer, which things are becoming more precious. And that gives us pointers as to where we should head, how we should conserve, what we should try to produce. And we have every human being connected with this marvelous information system we call a market. So don't fool with that thing. Don't say, oh, we need to change the minimum wage, or, oh, let's regulate, oh, let's put tariffs on, because that's goofing up this information system that's helping us to solve the large knowledge problem that can be solved when all human brains, the ultimate resource,
right,
in Julian's words, when those brains get connected, So the market connects human beings and creativity, gives us signals. When we allow it to work, miracles happen.
So we've got hardening of the arteries on one hand and Alzheimer's on the other. You're just a cheery guy tonight.
Well, let's see if we can't find something that we can end on with a happier note.
Well, I do want to, I'll try that, but I don't want to let you get away without telling at least one Baptist and bootlegger story. So how about bringing us up to date on e-cigarettes?
E-cigarettes is a wonderful bootlegger Baptist story, I would say, unfortunately.
And remind our listeners the paradigm.
Bootleggers and Baptists gets its name from old stories about dry counties or states or Sunday closing laws that shut down liquor stores. Those laws are generally supported by people who would like to see a diminution in the consumption of alcoholic beverages. Let's call them Baptists. They like it when the liquor stores are closed on Sundays. There's another group who wants to get rid of competition, at least one day a week. Let's call them bootleggers. When those liquor stores are closed on Sunday, the bootleggers can have a holiday selling their booze, which they buy from those same liquor stores on Saturday, and sell it at a premium. And so when the laws come up for reauthorization in the state capitals or at the city council, you can count on one thing. The bootleggers will be there saying, help support your local bootleg. No, they won't ever show up.
Right.
They don't have to. The Baptists do it for them.
So let's look at e-cigarettes, an amazing invention that solves several problems. It reduces the health effects of cigarettes. It makes smokers less obnoxious to the people around them. And it might help some people quit. Many companies and the government seem to be at war with e-cigarettes.
They really are. And there's some company that's joining in with that. But the e-cigarette phenomenon is a critically interesting one. Firms can go into that business at very low cost if you want to be a, quote, cigarette producer. Probably if you and I wanted to, we could figure out a way to launch our e-cigarettes on the web.
It's a battery, it's a heater, it's a little bit of tooling.
So entry is easy. Then you have the major tobacco companies who are in a cartel that was established by the attorneys general of the United States, doing something that is called a settlement that comes out of litigation, which involves billions of dollars paid annually, collected by the big tobacco companies, distributed to each and every state in America.
But it made every politician a silent partner in the tobacco business.
They almost had to assign a designated smoker in every family. And so in order for the funds to keep flowing, you got to keep selling cigarettes. And so e-cigarettes are a substitute for the real cigarettes, if you want to use that word. In a sense, for some health advocates, it's a wonderful substitute because it does get you away from the cancer-causing ingredients that's in the smoke of burning tobacco. For other advocates, they say, well, wait a minute, hold on. It might cause people to move to regular cigarettes later. The evidence on that is unclear, but United Kingdom made their decision, their health departments, by saying, on balance, e-cigarettes are good.
Oh, they have?
Yes.
Okay.
U.S., we're not sure. Well, who are the bootleggers and who are the Baptists? Obviously, one of the bootleggers would be the big tobacco companies who want to hold on to their market share. But another bootlegger are state governments. Looking for revenue, they want to make sure that the tobacco revenue bonds that they sold, counting on funds coming in from the Attorney General settlement, will be paid off.
They don't want to admit they're reliant on selling cancer sticks.
Right. And now it's easy to find the Baptists. Anyone who is opposed to smoking, period, doesn't matter what you smoke.
Yep.
Anyone who can say, there's always a risk of bad health, prove it that it's not.
Right.
They take the high ground. They take the moral high ground, and the Baptists are dancing with them and singing in the chorus and the choir.
Bruce, I can't look at any economic situation now and not see it through that lens. Before I let you go, give us some hope.
Hope is in freedom. Hope is in the ultimate resource. Here's the interesting thing. Even though we are up to our eyeballs in rules and regulations in most of the industrialized world, there are more people globally enjoying freedom than ever in the recorded history of mankind.
Sure.
Freedom is at an all-time high as it is measured. As freedom has risen, income growth is expanding rapidly for people who practically have had no income. So it's a much brighter world than it could be. But we know it could be even brighter.
Well, let's hope it goes in that direction. Bruce, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Wonderful talking with you, Bill.
That was Professor Bruce Yandle, Dean Emeritus at Clemson University's College of Business and Behavioral Science, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Real Clear Radio Hour is a not-for-profit, donor-supported program produced in conjunction with Real Clear Politics, America's premier independent political website. To make sure you don't miss any of our shows, stop by realclearradio.org and sign up for updates. Today's program was partially underwritten by the generous support of Old Boston Restorations, a Victorian property management company in Boston's South End. Visit them online at oldbostonrestorations.com. Ahead, we'll speak with Ryan Young, fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and the co-author of People Not Ratios, Why the Debate Over Income Inequality Asks the Wrong Questions. Stay tuned.